A Babylonian tablet says the army of Cyrus entered the city without a battle. It says it twice, about 2 different cities, in the space of 3 lines. 3 months later, somebody in Babylon signed a receipt for rebuilding one of the city gates. Both documents are contemporary. Both are Babylonian. Only one of them is famous. 8 years earlier, Cyrus took Sardis and the whole western edge of Asia with it. Media was already his. What is left in front of him is the oldest and richest city on earth, sitting in the middle of a floodplain between 2 rivers, behind walls that had a reputation across the known world. Babylon in 539 was not a relic. It was the working capital of an empire that had eaten Assyria, sacked Jerusalem, and run the Near East for 70 years. The walls were thick enough that Herodotus claimed you could turn a 4-horse chariot on top of them. Its king was Nabonidus, and Nabonidus had a problem that was entirely his own making. He had spent about 10 years of his reign not in Babylon at all, but at Timah, an oasis deep in Arabia, 600 miles from his own throne room. While he was gone, the New Year festival could not be held. Could not. The Akitu required the king's own hands on the god's own hands, and his son Belshazzar, running the kingdom as regent, was not the king and could not stand in for him. For years running, the most important thing Babylon did every year simply did not happen. Nabonidus also spent his reign promoting the moon god Sin, in a city whose establishment belonged to Marduk. You will read that this outraged the priesthood and cost him his throne. Be careful with that story. The 2 documents that push it hardest are the Cyrus Cylinder and a poem called the Verse Account of Nabonidus. Both were written under Persian rule, after the fact, to explain why the man who had just taken the city was the rightful owner of it. They tell you what the new regime wanted said. They are not a survey of Babylonian opinion. In the autumn of 539, the Persian army came down out of the eastern hills along the Diyala, heading for the Tigris. Babylonia is flat, wet and cut by rivers and canals, which means an invader does not get to choose his road. He goes where the crossings are. The crossing that mattered was at Opis. Nabonidus did the correct thing. He brought his field army north and put it between the Persians and his capital. If Babylon was going to be defended anywhere, it was going to be defended here, at the river, before the enemy ever reached the plain. The Chronicle gives the battle one line. Cyrus fought the army of Akkad at Opis on the bank of the Tigris, and the army of Akkad went backwards. That is the entire military history of the last stand of the Babylonian Empire. One sentence, no numbers, no maneuvers, no names below the king. And then the Chronicle says something that historians have been arguing about ever since, in a line that is physically damaged on the tablet. In the standard reading, Cyrus carried off plunder and slaughtered the people. The trouble is the verb. It means to reverse your position, and it is normally translated as retreat. But it is also the ordinary word this same chronicle uses for revolt. Read it that way, and it is not the Persians killing Babylonians at all. It is Babylonians turning on their own king, and the massacre is a civil one. Court and Bryant take the standard reading. William Lambert argued against it. Nobody can prove the other side wrong, because the evidence is a broken clay tablet and a verb that genuinely does mean both things. Whichever way you take it, something bad happened at Opis, and it was the last thing Babylon's army ever did. For days later, Sippar was taken without a battle. Nabonidus was there when the Persians arrived, and he did not stay. He ran south, towards the one place still standing. Behind him, the country was not being conquered so much as changing hands. 2 days after Sippar, on the 16th of the month, the army of Cyrus reached Babylon. The commander was not Cyrus. It was a man the Chronicle calls Ugbaru, governor of Gudium, a Babylonian province, which means the officer who took Babylon may well have been a Babylonian. And that is the sentence. The largest city in the world, the capital of the Near East, walls you could supposedly drive a chariot along the top of, entered without a battle. No siege, no storm, no assault worth writing down. Here is the city they walked into. The Euphrates runs straight through the middle of it, splitting Babylon into an eastern half with the Great Temple and the processional way, and a western half across the water. Anyone entering from the north and west has the river in front of him before he reaches the heart of the place. 17 days later, Cyrus himself came in. The Chronicle says green branches were spread in front of him. He announced peace to the city, appointed governors, and sent the gods that Nabonidus had dragged into Babylon for safekeeping back to the towns they had been taken from. And Nabonidus? The Chronicle gives him one clause. After he retreated, he was captured in Babylon, the city he had run to. No execution, no parade, no triumph. A later tradition sends him east to Carmania to live out his life as a provincial nobody, which may be true, and may simply be what a merciful conqueror wanted remembered. That last part he wrote down, at length, on a clay barrel buried in the foundations of Marduk's own temple. It was dug up in 1879, and it is in the British Museum now, and it is the most misunderstood object in this entire story. You will hear the cylinder called the First Charter of Human Rights. It is not. It is a foundation deposit, written in the first person by a conqueror, in the standard formula Mesopotamian kings had used for centuries to say that the local god had chosen them, and the previous man had it coming. Returning displaced gods was ordinary royal practice, not a new philosophy. So that is the Babylonian version, twice over, in writing at the time. Which leaves the problem of the other version, the one everybody actually knows. Herodotus, writing perhaps a century later, has Cyrus dig a channel and turn the Euphrates aside into a marsh until the riverbed inside the city was shallow enough to wade. Then the Persians walk up the river into Babylon. And the detail that makes it unforgettable. The city was so large that the people in the middle of it were still at a festival, dancing, with no idea the outer districts had already gone. Xenophon tells almost the same story, with trenches instead of a canal and a night-long feast. No contemporary source mentions it. Not the Chronicle, not the cylinder, not a single business document. And Herodotus tells a version of the same river trick about someone else entirely earlier in the same book, a legendary queen of Babylon. When a storyteller uses a trick twice, the second one is not evidence. The archaeology sides with the tablets. There is no burn layer at Babylon in 539. No destruction horizon, no collapsed defenses, nothing that says a great city was stormed. The place simply carries on. And the most boring evidence is the most convincing. Babylonian businessmen wrote contracts on clay and dated them constantly. Those contracts run straight through the autumn of 539 without a gap. Whatever happened to the city, it did not stop people buying barley. Except for one document. And it is not a chronicle, or a proclamation, or a Greek history. It is a receipt. A tablet cataloged as Seer 10 records a payment for reconstruction work at the Enlil Gate of Babylon, about 3 months after the city changed hands. Gates do not need rebuilding because a garrison opened them politely. Somebody broke that gate. The Enlil Gate is on the western side. Tellini's reconstruction is that part of Ugbaru's army forced it, got into the western half of the city, and then crossed the Euphrates to take the eastern districts where the temple and the palace were. Which is worth sitting with for a second, because look at what that means. A Persian force crossing the Euphrates on foot, inside the city, on the night Babylon fell. That is not the story Herodotus tells, but it is close enough to it that you can see how 100 years and a few retellings could turn one into the other. Which brings us to the version most people actually carry around, and it is none of these. It is a feast, a hand writing on a wall, and a king who dies that night. Belshazzar was real. That was doubted for a long time, until an inscription came out of the ground in 1854 praying for the long life of Nabonidus and his eldest son, named. But he was crown prince, not king. He never took the title, and no source of any kind, Babylonian, Persian, or Greek, records how or when he died. The account everybody knows was written much later, calls Belshazzar a king when the cuneiform says crown prince, calls Nebuchadnezzar his father when he was not, and hands the city to a ruler called Darius the Mede, who does not match anybody we can identify. It is a powerful piece of writing. It is not a report. Ugbaru, the man who actually took Babylon, died 3 weeks after Cyrus entered it. The Chronicle records the date and gives no cause, which is exactly the kind of silence that has kept people speculating for 2,500 years. So here's the whole thing, honestly. One real battle, at Opis, and it was not at Babylon, a capital that opened in October and had its conqueror walking the processional way 2.5 weeks later. No destruction layer, and one receipt for a broken gate that nobody quotes, quietly refusing to agree with any of it. And in the spring, the New Year festival was held. The Akitu, the thing Nabonidus could not do 4 years running because he was 600 miles away in Arabia, performed on schedule in Babylon by the conqueror's son. Cambyses took the god's hands. The city got its year back. It simply belonged to somebody else now. What Cyrus got was not just the city. It was Babylon's empire, entire and functioning. The tax rolls, the scribes, the roads, and everything west of the Euphrates as far as the border of Egypt. He did not have to conquer the Levant. He inherited it. Cyrus died on campaign 8 years later, in the east, fighting people whose name we are not even sure of. The empire went to his son, and Cambyses looked at the one great kingdom his father never took, the one that had promised Croesus an army and never sent it, and went to Egypt. That is the next one.